This is Louise Zimmer with another story from our pioneer past. The new year 1787 dawned cold and rainy, with more high water lapping at the corners of Fort Harmar. Our journal keeper, Joseph Buell, seems rather stoic about it by this time. After all, most of November and October had been spent dragging boats up out of the reach of the current, and on one occasion his buddy, Levi Munsell, lost not only his liquor supply, but his bunk as well. For days into the new year, bad weather struck again, and a windstorm this time. Joe doesn't mention whether it was accompanied by snow or rain. He just described it as a considerable hurricane which carried off the roofs of the barracks and, in his words, did indescribable mischief. This storm continued off and on for the next week, but without the hurricane-force winds, it had, in Joe's estimation, become nothing more than a tedious storm. He was to use that word tedious many times during the month of January. Once the barracks roofs were repaired, there wasn't much left to do. And you know what our grandmas always said about idle hands being the devil's workshop? Well, so it was there in Fort Harmar. January the 10th, Joe writes, considerable disturbance in the barracks, some of Captain Hart's men confined. Brady was whipped 100 lashes for taking a coat out of the sergeant's room. Riley and 2 others were whipped for being drunk on duty. Wilson whipped 100 lashes for suffering a boat to break from the bank while on sentry. 2 of Captain McCurdy's men were abusing some of our virtuous women. A little sarcasm there, I think. But Joe, fulfilling his duty as orderly sergeant, took care of the situation as directed. Well, maybe not exactly as his commanding officer directed him, but he did take care of it. I gave them a mortal scouring with an iron ramrod, he wrote. More trouble on the 15th. I confined a Massa Fox for counterfeiting a due bill which had my name on the back. It should have been a welcome break for the fellows when well-known scouts, the Kerr brothers, Hamilton and George, arrived from Wheeling to announce that they were going to build a house over on the island, and they asked for help. But no, even though orders came from the major himself, Orderly Sergeant Buell found himself hard-pressed to find 10 men who wanted to go over on the island and work in cold weather. Buell himself wasn't crazy about the idea either. I had orders to furnish 10 men to help the Kerrs build their house, he wrote. Some of the men refused, said they'd rather be confined. I did not give them that choice, although I thought it a little hard that soldiers should be turned out and forced to go against their will. But I must support my authority. Therefore I gave some of them a sound beating until they were willing to go without grumbling. Easy to see, Sergeant Joseph Buell had definite powers of persuasion. One of the reasons the men may not have wanted to go out to work in the cold is revealed in his next entry. At this time, the men are almost naked for clothing. However, relief came on the 19th when Captain Beatty arrived with payroll and part of our clothing allowance. We received the following articles of clothing per man: 2 shirts, 2 pair of woolen overalls, 2 pair of shoes, 2 pair of socks, 1 pair of buckles. After this, things began to look better around the fort. In mid-February, Joe noted that it looked like an early spring was on the way. The men were able to get outside and play ball, which kept most of them out of trouble most of the month. And on March 8th, he wrote that they had begun to fence and clear land for the gardens. The Carr family had moved into their house on the island, and on the 18th of March, Joe records, Isaac Williams arrived with his family to settle on the other side of the river. Several others have joined him, which makes our situation here much more agreeable. He doesn't name the others who joined Isaac and Rebecca Williams in their new home, but other records note well-known scout and ranger Bird Lockhart was among them, along with Jeremiah Sargent, David and Margaret Jameson, Francis Keller, Ignatius Ogden, and a fellow described as a long hunter from Virginia, Isaac Meeks, his wife, and his 2 children. A tragic destiny awaited the Meeks family. At some point in time, Isaac made a fateful decision to move his family from the Williams settlement to a place up the Muskingum known as Big Bottom. But no sense of impending troubles clouded those early spring days along the Ohio. Gardens were being prepared. Mail came down from Wheeling. Other supplies arrived from Fort Pitt. And on the 27th of March, we read, "Our hunters brought a buffalo into the fort, which was 18 hands high and weighed about 1,000 pounds. New clothes, new neighbors, mail, food. What more could a man ask for anyway?" Colonel Harmer himself arrived to muster the troops. He was on his way downriver to visit the troops at the Rapids, probably the Falls of the Ohio at Louisville. And then some not so good news. They were to have a new commander in charge. He doesn't say why or where Major Willis, who had succeeded Major Doughty, was going, but in any event, the new man in charge was said to be a stickler for detail and duty. Major John Frederick Hamtramck, an army man from his teens, having gained quite a reputation in the Revolution, and with a clear determination not to soil his record. "An unwelcome change," Joe Buell wrote, "ordering the troops to be turned out twice a day, too much exercise, and so forth and so forth." Between the garden and the new major's discipline, nobody had much time for mischief. And in spite of this regime, Joe had to admit, the weather begins to be warm and pleasant, the air is wholesome and agreeable, and we have plenty of business to do. May arrived with one of the year's biggest holidays, St. Tammany's Day, topped only by the 4th of July, and far surpassing Christmas or New Year's. We had decent entertainment and plenty to eat and drink. According to the Journal, we passed this day very happy. And who, you may well ask, was this St. Tammany? Well, in case you never heard of him, or his day, he was an actual person, a Delaware chief, Tammanyand, who had graciously welcomed William Penn to the New World in 1682. The chief continued to befriend the settlers throughout his long life, and before long his name came to be synonymous with the idea of a good life in a free land. And since May Day was already a holiday in many cultures, why not combine the two? After all, who doesn't want a day, any day, to celebrate, well, just about anything? Especially if you're stuck out there, as the fellows used to say, at the far end of nowhere. Fort Harmer, as it was in 1787, there in our pioneer past.